Wake up, buy here, pay here people. It's a beautiful day. Go grab yourself another cup of joe and say hello to Jim and Michelle Rhoads on the Buy Here, Pay Here Morning Show. Take it away, you two.
Hey, good morning.
Hi from Utah.
Yeah,
we're back from journeys. We went different directions. I went to Oklahoma for a time. She went to Arizona. Now we're back in studio and had a little bit of a technical snag this morning. Sorry to be late. We're just after transporting the board and moving it around, buttons and knobs got pushed, and so
I'm gonna get to play with it this afternoon. See if I can get it to before we have our podcast on Friday.
So we're just doing it the old-fashioned way.
We're doing it the old-fashioned way.
And we've got guest Kristin Acosta standing by, and she's a general manager in Iowa. We've been there about 12 or 13 years, and she appeared with us back on January 10th, and we talked about the sales analysis that we performed for her, where she sent us about a sales history on about 3,000 of their sales dating back to 2008, and showed their their net charge-off rate is extraordinarily low. And so we invited her to come back and talk to us again today about this matter of exactly how they go about collections, because we know that's where it's at when it comes to those low numbers.
Anything we need to talk about?
No.
Okay, then let's do that. Krista, hi. Welcome.
Glad to have you here. We had a little bit of an internet lag, so we'll warn our viewers today that there may be a little bit of internet challenge. So if it lags or freezes, just stand by. We're going to march ahead.
Jim gave me copies of all of the stuff that you sent him, because your numbers for your collections are outstanding, and that's good. Collections is good training, good people, good, and we wanted to kind of get to the nuts and the bolts of what it is that you do that allows you to get the kind of numbers you do. So do you want to talk about the...
Yeah, let me explain, for our viewers, we're on a White Hat Wednesday, which, for you, Kristin, I don't know how much you know about what we do with White Hat Way, but with White Hat sort of education, it's largely about customer success. It's about how to help the dealer be successful and have the customer have a successful outcome. And obviously, when you look at things like your static pool results, we can talk about collection success, but what's the measure of success? And I can just tell you, having worked with Kristin for some time now, by almost any measure that you want to measure collections results, their portfolio performs extraordinarily well. And I think what this leads to for me, Kristin, is we talk about, I wrote an article years ago and I called it the third P. Basically, a lot of times people talk about P and P being policies and procedures, which I think are obviously essential, but you can't really talk about policies and procedures until you talk about philosophy, right? So you got to talk about what is the approach that you bring. So that's the biggest part of what I was looking forward to talking about with you this morning is, if you'll back up and start us with, if you had a new hire, and you're trying to help them understand kind of how you think about customer relations and collections, let's start there. Just kind of talk.
Do you want to talk about how she hires?
Well, sure. Yeah.
So back to the hiring process, one of the things that I look for in people is prior sales experience and prior customer service experience, because we really try to deviate from a collector and more of a customer representative. That's how we label it when we hire. It's an account representative. They're the representative for that account in all aspects, but mainly for payments. And then when it comes to the interview process, you need to look for someone that's a problem solver, because that's a big part of it, is that has to be in their personality to be able to solve problems, because that's what it is. You don't want someone that's just got a firm hand. You need a problem solver. And then someone that's also strong-willed, because it can get hard. It's really a mental toughness to do that job. It really is. And so you got to look for that mental toughness. So those are the things that you're going to want to look for during the interview process, people that have those qualities. Because what it boils down to with my collections, it's just a simple mission. You have to sell yourself to that customer, because at the end of the day, their money only goes so far. And you want to make sure that you're at the top of their list. So they have to like you. They have to want to pay you. They can't be afraid of you. So that's why sales and customer service comes into it, because the collector has to sell themselves to that customer. So when Friday hits, they pay you first.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned the problem solving part of it, because I agree. It takes a certain amount of creativity to just, first you got to listen, you got to understand, investigate, learn what the problem is, because we understand, you mentioned in some of your material that sometimes customers want to turn in a car, they kind of want to give up, and it's understandable, life gets difficult. But I think what we have to do is be able to investigate, be creative, figure out what's really going on in order to be able to solve the problem at hand, especially in a way that's going to save the account, not just get today's car payment, but to save the account and keep them paying, right? So now we can talk about, if you did succeed in hiring somebody, take me into kind of how you would brief somebody who's new on how you guys think about collections beyond what you just shared.
Outside of problem solving and customer service, it's just, telling them like the customer is never the enemy. The reason why we have jobs is because of the customer. And yeah, they can be difficult, but that is why we have jobs. So we need to be in their corner. We need to be their champion. And a lot of times the reason why they come to us is because they struggle with adulting more or less. And so you have to tell yourself, okay, you're their life coach, you're their financial advisor. You're going to have to help them in ways outside of just when's your next payment. A lot of times you have to present yourself as a coach to these people. And so that really kind of helps our approach with the new person. Like, this is kind of what you're going to have to do with these people. You got to kind of hold their hand, help them adult. And a lot of times they really appreciate that. They kind of need that help.
Sure.
Absolutely. And an important part of that is someone that is approachable. So someone that's friendly, someone that, can be true to their word and all of that. One of the things that I noticed is an underrated method is persistency.
Yep.
And that it's like, so you said something about call, text, and send a letter every day. When does this persistent, we're trying to communicate, you start for you guys?
So we usually, day one is usually a call, a text, and then a late letter. And then the next few days is call and text. Now, if for some reason, a few days down the road, or if their number is disconnected, we do have permission to email them or message them on Facebook. So we'll try other avenues, but just staying on top of it. Because when I say my collector's been gone and I filled in for several days, sometimes it takes 5 to 7 days for them to respond, but most of the time they will. You just have to be persistent about it. Yeah. So you just got to let them know, hey, I'm not going anywhere. Once you talk to me, I'll leave you alone. And that's kind of what they realize, like, oh, if I just talk to her, she'll just leave me alone. And then we work it out and it's all good. But you can't give up after a few days. We have like late letters too. And then in the state of Iowa, we have right to cure. So, that's on day 11. But we just are persistent. When it comes down to other things, down the road, like we have references and things like that for tracking people down. But for the most part, just staying on top of them. And they realize, well, once I talk to her and work this out, they'll leave me alone.
Yeah.
So for our listeners that aren't familiar with that right to cure thing, because not every state has that, you want to just kind of explain quickly how that, because it is a factor. I think the fact that you guys have such great collections in a state that has more stringent requirements around possessions and some of those kind of things. Talk to us quickly about kind of how that works, what your requirements are.
Yeah. So with the right to cure, if there's any account balance passed through more than 10 days, so on day 11, we send them a notice of default. It gives them 21 days to bring their account current. And so in that time, we cannot repossess. We have to wait until the end of that 21 days if we do move forward with the repossession. So that gives us basically from start to finish 31 days that we still have to work the account. Usually if they're on an arrangement, we're not going to take it. But that's what the right to cure is. So we have a 31-day window before we can even take a vehicle.
Yeah. You mentioned being a good problem solver. And a lot of times being a good problem solver requires you to have good tools that you can use to solve problems. Because it's like just saying pay me is not a good problem. It's not solving a problem. So what kind of tools do you give your collectors to be able to work with their customers?
So we do, I know a lot of people don't like them, but we do like partial payments. It kind of depends upon the problem, right? Like what problem the customer's having. If it's like an unexpected bill or, a short-term financial situation, there's partial payments. We do offer deferments. If it's a repair bill that we can help them with, we'll be like, well, we'll just do the repair bill and then we'll do a side note for the repair. So that way they don't feel so overwhelmed. If it comes to like, say they're they've lost their job, we try to stay on top of who's hiring to give them suggestions. If you just got to get creative, and there's other times they're out of a job, they don't have any money, but they need a payment on the account. It's things they don't think about, like, hey, is there anything you want to sell on Swap Shop, to maybe kind of help you just get something on the account, who's some people that might be able to float you some money. You got to be creative for them and think of, because they get so hyper focused on that they can't pay. It's hard for them to see all their options. So that's your job, is to help them see what they can do. And it's like, maybe call your electric company. Have you ever made an arrangement with them? See if they'll help you out. Just kind of help them see the bigger picture, that there are going to be options.
Yeah, that is true, that when people feel like in a pinch, they become paralyzed.
Yes,
so being able to someone to offer them, well, what about this? And in a friendly manner.
Exactly. Yep, exactly.
Huge difference.
Yeah, you're really talking about a level of customer service and support that is going beyond. And I think this is the part that I really wanted to try to, identify for our listeners, because I tell you, Kristin, I've been, in buy here, pay here dealerships all across the country, and I don't hear enough of them doing what you're describing. I hear, they're making the call or leaving a voice message. It sounds very robotic. It's very process and procedural. And like I say, the robotic is the word that I often comes to mind when I hear them doing that. And I think what I can identify and use, same thing that I've heard. You remember we had a thing on social media. It's been a couple of years ago, but we had a collection supervisor who described how they have had so many scenarios where they have to sit and help a customer find new car insurance, or through all those kind of steps. And it's like, I think it's important for people to recognize, in order to have the kind of success that you guys are enjoying, you really want to be supportive of the customer in a lot of different ways. And so that starts with identifying what the problem is, and then just stepping in, because I've said that I find that our customers in the buy here, pay here space, one of the things that kind of makes them, as you said, they struggle to adulting, which, by the way, I'm also very adult. I'm not a big fan myself, but it's like the idea there is, if you can help them begin to sort that stuff out. A lot of our customers just don't know how to solve their own problems.
Right.
Right. So I think going through that is just, go ahead.
Well, I one of the things that I saw from you're really good at, when we've had you in the past, it's like you send such detailed information. That conflict resolution is something that you believe very strongly in training your people conflict resolution. First off, why is that so important to you?
It's so important because our customers spook easy. They do. Like, if you talk it to them the wrong tone, they can take something a certain kind of way. So they spook really, really easy. So you want to be able to handle like a difficult customer or a customer that has a problem, and you want to handle it in a way that they feel comfortable talking to you. And then that helps with the problem solving. When they're angry and they're upset, they don't want to pay, just come get the car, That conflict resolution training sets you out of that heated moment. And it's like, what's really happening? Did you find out they either lost their job, something unexpected happened, or it broke down and they're just frustrated. So that conflict resolution helps you take you out of that heated moment and just start asking determining questions. And those questions will help you solve that problem. And it helps you just kind of maintain your calmness and not to reach their level. And it helps you, de-escalate them to where you can just have a conversation and just get to the root of what the real problem is.
So I noticed in that you use, and this is something I see a lot of dealerships that they struggle with, and that is proper training. And so you use something that's called Skill Path seminars. And I've been to the conflict resolution skills, and that was like a decade ago. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, I could do a refresher, because it's been a while since I've worked with teams and managed teams in this, but it really is. And for those of you that are listening, write down Skill Path seminars. Most cities that are, close to you will have some kind of a curriculum. And, and I know for me, when I would send some of my team members there, it's maybe $150. I don't know how much it's changed for them to go, and they're gone for the day, but it is really, really, really valuable information. And they do a lot of role playing, and they just they've got people that are professional in learning and teaching people how to de-escalate a situation.
Yeah. And they have a lot of courses online now. I think maybe that kind of shifted with COVID because there's a lot more online, but there's conflict resolution specifically. There's, dealing with, a highly escalated customer. Like, you cannot believe the amount of topics that they cover that your people in your company, whether it's managers or salespeople, it's so good just to go through that list. And it is 100% worth the training.
Yeah. Well, that conflict resolution isn't just with our customers, it's with team members.
Yeah.
It's all of that, it's good life skills. And so I love that you invest in your team.
Mm-hmm.
Because that is so important, is that we see people, dealers that will just shadow them and throw them right into the fray and into the mix. And I have watched, just in my own experience, because in some of the positions I've had where I've managed customer service teams, that if they don't have proper skills, they become paralyzed.
Mm-hmm.
And they will take these things home with them. And then you have a team member who just doesn't like their job anymore.
Yeah.
And so that training helps.
And we know it's a difficult job. And I think the conflict resolution stuff is obviously important. And I think I can't resolve a conflict. I can't even have a conflict unless I can reach and speak to the customer.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think when I think about how you guys have, in order to solve problems, you have to have some degree of engagement and have the customer be willing to talk to you. So I think if we can go back a little bit, one of the things we talk about is having some level of trust, because I've heard you say that in a different way, is like the customer can't be afraid of us. Right. And so I think that's a really important psychological element that people who are newer to the business may not fully appreciate what we're talking about here in terms of, this level of customer engagement and building up some degree of trust. Because I know in some of your material you talked about, you want your collectors to know the customer, you want the customer to know the collectors, right? And know the team, know the company. So kind of talk to me about how that works. Like, what are some examples of how you guys achieve that? So
pretty much how I train right out of the gate, we do things a little bit different. Most people say, call them and be like, your $100 payment is due. Is that cash or card? Like, whatever. Whenever we call a customer, it's just like, hey, Mr. Customer, you missed your payment today. And then we stop. Because 9 times out of 10, they will tell you it's going to be in later. I was short on my check. And then most of the time, if you just say, hey, you missed your payment, just in passing, usually they will tell you what the problem is and they will work something out with you.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of the big thing. And then as you get to know your customers, like we have a customer, she pays cash. She always is within 5 days of her due date. So day 1, day 2, we don't even call her. I did have one collector that called her like on day 1, kind of like she was trained to do. Mm-hmm. And the customer got so offended. And it's like, no, you'll learn, like after day 6, if you call her, she'll be like, oh yeah, I'll be in. But you need to give them that time frame because they will be in and they do get a little bit offended. Another way that we put trust in the customer is sometimes they've had a reduction in hours or they've had something come up and they need an arrangement, but maybe they can't do an arrangement just yet. So we tell them, pay what you can when you can, providing they make their regularly scheduled payment. And so we give them a little bit of leeway to do it on their own. Like, hey, can you run an extra 50? Can you run an extra 100? Now, when that goes so far, usually we'll rein it in and we're successful at reining it in, but we try to just give them that leeway. So those are some things that kind of help just putting that trust in them.
Yeah, there is a lot of strength in, just like, hey, you missed your payment.
Yep.
And
they'll tell you.
Exactly, because most people don't like silence and they will fill it up with a lot of times.
Yep, exactly.
To get to the why, and Jim he teaches a lot of salespeople that exact same thing when you're doing a truth check in their credit report pull and what they've told you their circumstances are, is it's just like, oh, there's a discrepancy here.
Yeah.
Yep.
And, you touched on the sales and underwriting part. I think it's worth mentioning that Kristin, they have a very consistent underwriting practice. They don't use a sophisticated software in their underwriting. So I think we could dismiss that, because some people would be listening, well, yeah, if I had a great underwriting tool, if I could underwrite these deals better, which means I have to mention our dealer friend, Tommy Brandis from Pennsylvania. I've known Tommy. He's been a dealer for 30 plus years. And Tommy is one of these folks who says, kind of to the point of what we're talking about today, is, you can structure the deal right in terms of down payment, length of contract, payment amount. You can underwrite the deal based on the customer as well as possible. But if you don't have the collections team kind of dialed in, or you don't have a solution and a system and a good mechanism working on the collection side, obviously you're going to have a much higher default rate. You can't support the customer and solve these problems on the collection side. And so I think it's important for folks to understand, Kristin and their team do not have a super sophisticated underwriting system. They have a consistent one. They follow the same method that they've used forever in making those decisions. And so I think consistency is going to be job one on the underwriting side. And then when you move into the collection side, one of the things you kind of touched on that I picked up on is flexibility. Like this idea that, we talk about being friendly but firm, but you're also going to be flexible and creative in solving problems. And I think this is another area where collectors can take it personally. We've seen dealers who, really want super low delinquency, and it, kind of becomes personal, and they can become a little hard on the customer. So I think that idea of partial payments and flexibility is something that we also want to talk about. Like, how did that even come about with you guys? And by the way, I know you told me that you started in collections before you were, a general manager. You really started collections and quite enjoyed it. So feel free to kind of work that into your answer.
Yeah. So I came from a sales background, so it was just a natural, and that's kind of when we kind of discovered that was a good piece of the puzzle, because I still had all that sales in me, and to get the customer to like me and to talk to me. But as far as like partial payments, things like that, so we have always gauged our success by three things: our write-offs, our recency, and our delinquency. So if our delinquency is a little bit higher, like for us, 17% is high delinquency, but I look at my recency number and I see, we're at 96, 97, 98 recency. I don't look at it as partial payments being a bad thing. That tells me, okay, there's a lot of people behind, but they're all paying. And that's super important. So we just got to keep that momentum to keep them paying. So we don't look at partial payments as a negative thing. And so we use the partial payments a lot as far as if someone's maybe has a garnishment, or if they were short on hours. It's like, okay, so your paycheck is 50% less. Can you pay, half of your car payment, and we'll catch you up the next week? So just to kind of keep that, to try not to build up too much of a past due balance. And their willingness to make partial payments goes a long way with us. They're willing. When people stop paying, that's kind of a problem. But if they're willing to just do partial payments, to us, that's a good sign. And so it's just kind of something that we've kind of just always done, because we really watch that recency. When recency goes down, that's when it's a little bit alarming. We monitor that number so much more than we do delinquency.
Good. Explain why.
Because with the recency, that tells you 98% of your customers are paying. They're on arrangements. Maybe they had a little hiccup, but like when your recencies get lower and lower, your customers aren't paying. And so now you got to like play catch up and get people back to paying. So even though we got a high delinquency, they're on arrangements, they're on the right track. Eventually it's going to balance out to where those delinquencies will go down in time as their arrangements, come through. But we watch that recency, because that tells us people are paying. And so when that drops, that's what's alarming. We don't care that someone's behind necessarily, as long as they're paying. We just want to keep them paying. I guess that's kind of our mission. Just keep the customer paying. So if by chance we do get it back in a repossession, we're close to the green or well in the green. So that's kind of our philosophy, is just do what we can to keep the customer paying.
And it's, that recency is like a measurement of how active they are in their account. And so, yeah.
And it's a really good collection tool for us too. If somebody's behind, we just say, hey, you don't have any activity on your account. Can we just get something on there? Because we don't like to see 30 days without any activity. Yeah. So that's kind of how we word it, just so that way they're trying, there is activity on the account, and it's a good collection tool to be like, we'll still work with you, but you just got to give us a little something to just show some activity on your account. And they usually do.
Yeah. So, we're always mindful on the morning show that, it goes out on YouTube and anybody can listen to it, including collectors. So I don't want to be too specific
And
here.
customers.
Yeah. And customers. I think it's important to think about how can you share with us a little bit about how your compensation works in the collections team? Like, again, not too specific, but do you have or incentives in certain areas?
Yep. So there's a base salary, and then with delinquencies, there's an hourly bump per week if delinquencies that week are under 15%. And then there's a higher bump if delinquencies are under 13%. Same with recency, there's an hourly bump for the week. So we monitor every week. If we're at 96% recency, there's a pay bump per hour. And at 98% or higher, there's a bigger pay bump. Then once a month, there's a bonus if there's no new repossessions added. And then there's a bigger bonus if the write-offs that month were 0.75% of our portfolio. Mm-hmm. So our net write-off needs to be less than 0.75% of our portfolio.
Wow. So I think you told me about a year ago that you were 12. So it must be about 13 years in your
getting there yet.
Yeah. So I'm going to guess, because you touched on something significant there. In the 13 years that you've been there, there probably has not been a week go by that you didn't have those weekly numbers that you mentioned, delinquency, right? It's a weekly focus. It's really daily, but you have a measuring stick that every week is a kind of a barometer on where you're at. And I think that that's important, looking at both delinquency and recency, having it in the pay plan, because it does reward flexibility, which I think is an important thing that we want, especially the people that are newer to buy your pay or collections, lease your pay or same. It's like, if you're newer to that, you might be inclined to reward delinquency only. We know a lot of dealers who look at delinquency kind of exclusively. And I think that's dangerous because it doesn't tell the entire story, and it kind of penalizes your team for cooperating with people and doing what you're describing, which is keep the customer paying. They would a collector would suffer on a delinquency bonus if they allowed partial payments, right? And so it's important to kind of recognize that. But I think, again, going back to just kind of philosophy and approach, I think what I've heard, and maybe Michelle, you can pick up some more here, and just trying to help our listeners think about what is the approach that you bring. I've heard, cooperation. I've heard you, sell yourself and have something of a relationship with a customer, which begs the question about how do you guys approach auto pay? Do you have a fair number of customers on auto pay?
We have a very high percentage of auto pay. It's really funny, actually. Back when Brad was in 20 Group back in the 90s, his best idea time, if anyone's familiar with 20 Group, there's idea time. And his idea time was putting all the customers on auto pay. And everybody thought that was just insane. Yeah. Like, it was just outlandish to not see the customer. So he was a little bit ahead of his time, but we've always had a very high ACH penetration, usually like 90% or higher. We very rarely have cash customers. So that's also been a huge part of our success, is the very high penetration of automatic payments.
Right.
And is that part of your sales process, is to get them set up on the automatic payments as well?
Yeah. So it's not even an ask. We just say, do you want to do, checking and routing or debit card for your payments? So it's not even. Now, there will be some people like, I don't want to do that. And then, we have to respect that. Mm-hmm. But usually just saying, here's the ACH, and then people just, they're down, it's good to go. Yeah.
When we talk about White Hat Way, one of the things, besides being approachable and working with people, is being very clear in understandings. And so one of the things that I noticed in your notes, it's in the notes, were take notes, and that most DMSs really allow you to do a lot of notes on an account, and then making sure that if you've got someone else handling a batch of customers, that they are reading the notes, so they're kind of familiar. Sometimes we get excited and don't go back to just take a quick look at something, and then, like the one gal that was calling on the first day, and you probably had some notes in there that this is what their pattern is. But talk to us a little bit about how you make sure that your understandings are very clear with your customers.
How you mean as far as how we note the account? So we just pretty much note the accounts verbatim, even as small as like when we call and text a customer and there's no response, we note that, because when they're upset about something, it's like, Mr. Customer, I have 10 days of notes where we called and text, and you have not responded to us. Like, we've been trying to get a hold of you. So that's, super important, just to show that like we've been trying to get a hold of you. And then customers don't like inconsistency. They don't like having to call and talk to somebody else and the person doesn't know what's happening with their account. It really frustrates them. Mm-hmm. So we try to be as specific as possible. It's, customer called in, they're paying $50 today. Next week, they're going to pay an extra $50. So we'll note the account. And then Fraser allows us to do a special message. So as soon as their account pops up, that's in the forefront. Customers to pay X amount on such and such date. So it's very specific. Everything that we talked about is in there. So that way there's no confusion.
And so do I gather that you don't have, like if I'm on your collection team, I don't have a certain portfolio that are my customers. Do I work the entire portfolio if I work with you guys?
Yes.
Okay. So I could speak to any customer at any time. And you said you work pretty intensely the 1 days and 2 days, like it's a rhythm for 1 day late. So if I'm a collector, I'm going to be working that entire queue, if you will, of 1 day late customers. So I'll speak to any customer at any time. Again, I don't have my pool or my portfolio contract.
Right.
That's important because it really goes to approach and it goes to kind of your system and again, the kind of the procedural parts of this. And I think that allows you to have consistency in the way that, people work accounts. And then I think, we should probably let Kristin get back, but I did want to talk a little bit about how do you handle, because I know you've seen it where collectors start to take the job personally, right? It starts because you do build a bit of a relationship with a customer and you get frustrated when they don't follow through on their promises. So how do you manage that part with your team?
It happens, and it's just reminding them the customer is not the enemy and reminding them too that they're doing everything that they can, because that's kind of something that we've experienced recently is she just kind of feels like she's hitting a wall. And so I went through every single past due account with her. It was 2 pages worth, whether they're on arrangement or not. And I'm like, you're doing all the right things. I'm like, I'm not alarmed by anything that I'm seeing. So, having someone to review those and just make sure that you're on the right track is a bit refreshing. And so she could just kind of take a step back, like, okay, I'm not doing anything wrong. It's not me. I'm like, your accounts are fine. You've got these arrangements. You've got some due date changes. Like everything's fine. But just really reminding them that we're here to help the customer, be their champion, be on their side. And so that's just super important. Just remember, like, this is what we do. This is what we're here for. That's why you're in the position, because you are the most qualified to help these people. You're in the right spot. And this is just what we do, and they're not the enemy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that you it's not punitive. It's like that you might be feeling that way, but it's like, let's look at all the good things.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Because, everybody has bad days, customers and collectors and all of that. And it's learning through experience and through different classes, courses, all of that. And also through having a good leader willing to just have those conversations and be, you as a leader are not just an advocate for your customer, you're an advocate for your team.
Yeah.
And so it's like, yeah, you're doing a good job. And I know one of the things just in your team, culturally, Brad and it's Brad. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. That there is a deep culture of support for all of your team. And so they feel appreciated and they feel supported. And I've been in a lot of respect for what you and Brad have created with your teams, where, even just when the economy was getting really bad, Brad's like, I know groceries are tight. Here's some extra money for food.
Yep, exactly.
To be able to help. So, it does, just like we want our customers to feel like that we're approachable, we're being neighborly, we're their neighbors, that we're here to help. it's so important too within, most people listening would be dealers, is that you have that same culture cultivated in your team, is that you're approachable and that you are neighborly and you do care.
Yep.
I
Exactly.
think the other thing I heard from that, Kristin, is you guys do appreciate your customers and you respect your customers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right? So that's
Exactly.
a thing and I do want to caution listeners, because I know when we've had some of the stuff we shared in the past, we've had dealers kind of chime in and act like, some small town in Iowa is different. And I just want to make sure that people know when they hear this, it's important that people recognize these practices that Kristin describes. They're going to pay dividends in any market, anywhere, and with any customer base. And so I think it's important to not dismiss that and recognize that these practices that we're talking about, this philosophy and approach, is going to pay dividends. Is it an investment that we make? Does it take a little more hours from our team to be advocates and help the customer talk through their stuff? It does. Is it a worthwhile investment? I think when you see Kristin's charge-off numbers, you'll say,
Yeah.
it's a worthwhile investment.
Yeah. It drives me nuts when I've worked in customer service and you dive into some of the bigger companies. It's like, you've got 30 seconds to get the problem solved and be on the next call. And we have the opportunity in Buy Here, Pay Here to really, it's not a punitive thing to take time to develop a relationship. It's an important part of what we do.
Uh-oh, we lost your picture.
Uh-oh. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Okay.
I think that we are.
Yeah, we can wrap up. Well, I know.
Yeah, hi.
I know Kristin's got to probably go help the team shovel snow. You guys got some snow there overnight.
Yeah,
right?
we did. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you, sister.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining. We really appreciate you being so willing to share
Of course.
what works well for you guys. And you and your entire team, and Brad have been just so supportive in helping share that with other dealers. So,
Of course.
if you wanted to stick around for just a second, we're going to close out the podcast so we can say a proper goodbye.
Yep, sounds good.
All right. Thanks.
Stand by.
All right.
Okay, good stuff. Like, it's always challenging when you talk about things that are a little more intangible. It's part of what we do with White Hat Way, is talk about some of these intangibles, because they're just as relevant. They're just harder to identify. But I think there were a lot of things that you heard Kristin talk about there that are they're very significant elements of their success. And I think it's not all things that you can measure on a piece of paper. So it's just important to
just
recognize
before
that.
we wrap up, George is like, all Buy Here, Pay Here dealers are small town lenders. And if we can remember that, it's no matter what size or town they're in. And then Karen, hey, Karen, thanks again. She's like, great episode.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that we always say is, look, these are human beings that you're working with, regardless of your market. I think these are human elements that we're talking about. And so this is an important thing to recognize.
All right. Okay. Well, it's Wednesday and we are absolutely. Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate you taking the time. And if you have any questions or want to be able to reach out to us and ask questions, reach out to us and we can get you guys contacted. Again, thanks so much for making this part of your Wednesday, and we will see you in a couple of days.